we now have we're now talking about an AI economy as well as a digital economy. So Wendy has just been in Malaysia, living up to this brief of global AI. She travels the world talking about AI. Having established the Web Science Institute in Southampton, having kicked off the AI industry by writing a report for the government on the future potential of AI, and then being responsible for masses of funding. Which is being
because I'm bored.
This is her Regis chair. She's just Regis chair of Youth Science at ECS.
Have I got a clicker?
I don't think we have clickers.
How do I sit down then?
Do you want me to just press the button? Do you want to say next, and then I'll press the button for you?
No. It's just that, don't we have clickers? God. Yes, I know, but I'd like, so I have Achilles tendonitis, right, so I have the walking stick and standing up for what was going to be an hour. We really don't have a clicker. All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Jane.
Hey! Right, so I'm really sorry I'm late. As well as coming back from Malaysia this morning, I had a board meeting of the Digital Catapult on the phone, where we had a very important decision to make, so I had to stay on the line. And hello, and I hope you've had a good summer school, and let me try and just wind up. I have to finish by 12 because I'm introducing another seminar at 12 upstairs, so. Hello, Pauline. Okay, so let me whiz through, and it will be a whiz because there's an hour's worth of stuff here, and I want to leave time for a bit of discussion at the end. So, you all know about him and the web. I don't have to tell you about him. And you've all seen this graph of how it all took off. So many stories, which I'm not going to go through because as web scientists or people who are affiliated around that sort of area, you should understand all this stuff about how it happened. I put that graph in here because AI is very different. And this was the internet. The web and the internet took everybody by surprise, was the point. It sort of appeared from nowhere. And for the first 10 years, people ignored it. When Google emerged and people had computers at home, broadband Wi-Fi, people started to take interest in it. So for 5 years, it was, oh, wow. And in 2004, there's a dispute as to where we actually named Web Science. I think it was the Style Pub here, which is now being pulled down? Yeah. Anyway, it was either in Tim's room at MIT or in the Style Pub. We decided to, we were trying to understand why the semantic web wasn't taking off. And we started looking back, which is when we started drawing these types of graphs. And I kept on drawing them. And we realized that it wasn't just about the technology, it was about people and what people did with it, and that we create it because we create the content. And so we wanted to create this interdisciplinary way of studying what I might prefer today to call it connectivity science, but Sandy Penton at MIT coined that phrase for his group, so I can't bear to actually call it connectivity science because he would say he then got there first. But it is actually about connections and lots of interconnections. And as Ted Nelson would have said, everything is intertwingled, and we are all intertwingled because of this technology that we do things with that then lead to unexpected consequences. And when we wrote the Web Science manifesto, the sort of research roadmap for Web Science in 2006, Facebook had only just started. Nobody's heard of Facebook. MySpace, people had heard of MySpace, but Facebook had not become the thing it is today. Twitter hadn't started. And we talked about privacy, security, and trust. And I'm very proud of that because that is where it is at today. And people at the time said, oh, well, what does that matter? What does it matter? What does your data matter? You know, this is just fun, it's playing, it's... now, of course, we're in a world where it dominates. This one goes up to 2015. We can't quite decide how to portray the next few years because it all gets so complicated. But you know, it dominates, and it's what it's shown us is that something that was created as open and free to enable everybody to get onto it. And we used to talk about things like the democratization of knowledge and how the web would enable democracies to flourish and grow. And we now see that it's turning against us in many ways, and horrible things happen on it. We do horrible things to each other in real life, and we do horrible things to each other in the digital life. I say real life, I mean physical. I know you can't really separate the two these days. But, and also the bad guys use it to do what they want to do, like make money or try and get a certain result in an election, or control its citizens by being able to listen in on everything they do and say. And we live with the consequences of that. Now, in our society, we're trying to retrospectively make it safer and more secure and more enable privacy. And Tim's big thing is solid social linked data. It's about giving us back control of data. I was a bit wary of using the term personal data, because there is actually very little data that is personal to you. Very tiny amount of your data is actually personal to you, largely the biometrics. And you share that with the people who measure it, maybe. Almost every piece of data you think you own is actually shared with somebody else or something else, because that's how it's created. That's why the links are so important. But anyway, that's another whole story. So that was the motivation for what we did, and there were lots of lessons in that for the way that AI is rolling out today. I give this talk in China, and this is a Chinese version of that. Same sort of companies, same sort of curves, but a different data governance regime. It's not all bad in China, but of course they do run themselves very differently to the way we do. So, you know, I'm not frightened about talking about this stuff out there. I'm very interested in the growth of TikTok, which I don't personally use. Do you use TikTok? Because I gather it's becoming very popular, and it is a Chinese company. So I assume if you use it, then the Chinese have access to your data if they want. But this is I'll come back to that at the end of the talk. So that was the motivation, and we were looking at trying to understand how all these things that start off very small, like, you know, a Facebook with a handful of users, or Google with a few hundred people using it, and then take off to the macro, and doing it from a socio-technical perspective. I still put this picture in. I look terribly tired. I just got off a plane. Nigel and I had just flown in from London, I think. Well, certainly maybe the night before. And that's Tim, myself, Danny, and Nigel. And Rod Brooks was head of CSAT at the time, and he's the robotics guy. He's Mr. iRobot, very famous researcher and a lovely man, and a good entrepreneur too. And we got quotes by Eric Schmittens, and Google never gave us a lot of money, but they did say what we were doing was the right thing, and then we set up the trust. And this was Tim's, the diagram he did on his whiteboard that he now uses in talks to decide to talk about how the web evolved, the co-creation, is that okay, Pauline? Co-construction, Susan Halford looks like co-constitution, anyway, it doesn't matter, definitely co. And the idea that the tech is design something, and then people use it, start to use it, and there's a co-creation to this. Something that starts off really small, and the only way to make money on the web, because it's open, is to get everybody using your stuff, and then when they start using it, you can then sell things to them. And but in order to do that, you need to understand who they are, build their profiles. But anyway, one of the magics that Tim talks about is how do things go from micro to macro. Then when they go macro, that's when you can start analysing and finding out what people do. And that's given rise to this whole research agenda. Just it's not always called web science, but there's an awful lot of, well, like, I don't know about the conferences the social scientists go to. We go to technical conferences that do this type of analysis, but from a technical point of view, data mining type approach. And websites, we try and make sure that stays interdisciplinary, keep the conference small but perfectly formed. And we're running it here next year. Yeah. And when it goes big, that's when bad things start to happen. Unexpected consequences of these, and then you have to fix those problems. And Tim says, well, you get creativity, and sometimes it's just panic, right? Governments panic about who should take the stuff off the web. I'll come back to that. Anyway, that was, and then this is Nigel's butterfly diagram, which is trying to, there's a lot of disciplines not on here, but the point is that web science is very, very interdisciplinary. At Southampton, we very much focus on social science meets social science law, economics, meeting with computer science or psychology. And other web science labs focus on different sort of interdisciplinary collaborations, but the key, political science is really important in this mix. But the thing is, it's not, as Jim said, not the union of all these. You don't have to understand all this. You just have to. It's an interdisciplinary. It's much more than just that intersection of all those. It's how these subjects come together to help you understand what's going on in this ecosystem. And the other approach we've taken is comes from Tim's book. The word social machine came from the book he wrote in 1999, and lots of you will have seen this quote. It's one of the biggest quotes, one of the ones that's used all the time, and it's the bit about where he says computers can help you. Basically, he's saying computers can help manage it, create, understand what a digital society is about, and manage that if we use them to create abstract social machines. On the web processes which people do the creativity, i.e. create the content, and the machine does the administration. We lived with that for a while, but now, of course, the machines are doing the creativity as well. Right, so all this needs updating, but that's where we got the term social machines from. And Dave DeRoy's pictures from all these different people who were involved at the beginning of this. Dave DeRoy's graph, I still use it as to the coming together of lots of data, lots of people create the Googles and the Facebooks and the Twitters and the eBays and the Ubers and the Airbnbs and so on. And the Alibabas and the Baidus and the Weibos and everything. And we've had several big research projects, a lot of people working together, and this was the, what was it, Socium project, the last one before Nigel went to Oxford. And Kieran, bless him, wrote the book. Put together, it's quite expensive, but there are copies around. Springer priced it quite high, but it's a very good summary, long summary, of what we did in that project, which involved Southampton, Oxford and Edinburgh. And we talked about web science as the theory and practice of social machines, which is what got us the grant, really, changing the term. So, web science and AI. Now, there's a lot of people out there, and this is really why I wanted to sort of reboot the conference a bit next year, that say, well, web science is to do with the web, and that's something that's been, right? What do we need to worry about that for? Well, today is all about AI, and of course there's, well, I think my next slide says it, yes. I must be awake. Let me have some more coffee. So, Tim coined the phrase the semantic web right from the get-go. On his manifesto that he published in 1989 about how he was going to build the web, in the bottom right-hand corner it talks about, he doesn't call it semantic web there, but it gives a picture of links between data elements. And he called that semantic web because it was like it was knowledge. It was like, how do you... And in fact, we were doing that in Microcosm, the system we built here, because we had our links in Microcosm with triples, and the idea was there was a source, this is where the link starts, this is where it goes to. You could do two-way links in Microcosm, but the middle bit, the triple, or the third item, was why. We didn't ever really explore that too much, but that was there for, so we were actually, and I hadn't made the connection and using it was semantic linking we were building an infrastructure for. And for a long while, I remember a time when Nigel and I went to Microsoft at the beginning of the web science movement, and then when we talked about web science, we talked a lot about the semantic web, because the whole reason why we went this way was to try and get the semantic web. This is 2006, 7, 8. We wanted people to use the semantic web and RDF and everything. Tony Hay, who was, had been dean here and was then vice president of Microsoft, he invited us to give the talk, and he said, whatever you do, you can use the terms semantic and web, but you can't use them in the same sentence. Right, we couldn't make the two, he said, don't call it semantic web, it doesn't go down well here. Google always refused to call it semantic web, they use the term knowledge graph. And the knowledge graph is probably bigger than the semantic web, and the semantic web, a lot of people understood that as being RDF. And programmers didn't really like RDF, so they didn't. And the companies came up with RDF schema, but now there's conferences, knowledge graph conferences, which are bigger than semantic web conferences, but it's talking about the same stuff really. It's understanding the network of who's linked to who, and how you work that out. And of course that's inherently about AI as well. I remember, because this is what happened, and it's all Jim Hender's fault, a friend as he is, that basically when I remember the conference, I think it was the web conference in Hawaii. David always got a picture of this. And, you really have to suffer for being a researcher, don't you? We went to Hawaii for a conference, the web conference this was, in 2000. So before we were doing all this. And it was all about, that was the year that Tim really was trying to get the semantic web off the ground. He was there, of course. And Jim Hender turned up. I think Tim had invited him because they wrote their paper around that time. And, Jim, I came to the web conference and was talking all about the semantic web. And then, I don't just blame Jim, and he's a very good friend, by the way. They then started a semantic web conference, separate from the web conference. The AI, by they, I mean the AI people. And I used to talk about the semantic web going down an AI rat hole, because it went into a lot of upside down A's and backward E's. There's an awful lot of logic and proof and very theoretical. Let's prove we can do this. Let's prove that ontologies can, is it one, or how do we merge ontologies? And they still have those conferences, that's fine, but it didn't actually help the growth of the semantic web in practice. And anyway, that's an old story now, but now at the time Google said we can do everything by this information retrieval stuff. Now, of course, they now are they coined the term knowledge graph because they use this type of technology. Nobody really knows, I don't think, well, I don't know, maybe some of you do, what formats they use to do this. It's inherent now in most of these big web-based companies, this type of technology. What's linked to what? What's connected to what? Because if you don't know that, you can't actually sell things to people. So web services, social networks use AI calls to enhance performance. That's what I've just been talking about. My heavens, that's interesting. I do know what's coming in these slides. And web scientists use AI to do our research, like data mining and so on. And web science is increasingly about studying the effect of AI on the evolution of the web and the internet. So it's inherently part of what we do. Why the big AI now? And this I am going to skip through because I haven't got time. When I'm talking to people who don't really understand AI, I go through this quite carefully. But basically, Alan Turing started it all. Alan Turing started it all, so the Brits like to claim we started everything, but the term was coined in the States, and in the early days it was very much about building machines that could actually do what the human brain does, but in those days computers were very small, it was all about decision trees, and traditionally, so AI, the point about this slide is it's very different to the growth of the internet, which came, well, the web, I'm talking about there, the web and the internet. The web the internet was there, the web comes along, and to most of the world it appeared very suddenly and grew like this, very, very fast. AI comes in waves. There's a wave of ideas. People think of ways to build intelligence into machines. It gets some research grants for it, and then we traditionally have an AI winter. I started in AI in the when I moved from maths to computing, I moved into intelligent tutoring systems, believe it or not, and I was doing stuff in Prolog, so I was thinking about expert systems, and that was the sort of work. Nigel was a knowledge-based system person. That was the work that came out in the 70s and 80s. Loads of grants. This is when Japan had their 5th generation project. But the machines were still very small. There wasn't a lot of data, and it was all about Lisp and Prolog. And the research agencies, nobody was using this stuff, and the research agencies said we're going to stop funding this. And in fact, the predecessor to me was, I can't remember his name. Professor, I can't through the fog think of his name, but he's on YouTube saying in 1970 something, we are not going to fund AI anymore in the UK. Right? It is not something we're going to fund. And it was probably quite right at the time. But of course the work went on. So this winter was when Geoffrey Hinton, who's credited with the invention of advanced neural networks and so on with others, but that's the winter then he left. He did his PhD at Edinburgh, and he left to work for the States because he could see more funding there than here. And then he went to Canada, and that's when, during that winter, if you like, the ideas had been around previously, but they sort of started to be realised in this idea of neural networks. How can we build design software based on how the brain works? So it wasn't trying to build a human brain, it was trying to use the way the brain works to design the software, really. And out of that's come, around this time, of course, I say of course, things, when I came to Southampton in '84, there were people doing computer vision research, and there still are, of course, and speech recognition, and it was all so primitive. And everybody said in those days, very learned people said that machines would never be able to recognize a human face out of a crowd. Right, that was an impossible challenge. 30 years later, it's a technology that is being used around the world without that many checks on it. Something that society has got to work out how to deal with. And where was I going with that one? Sorry. Oh yes, and so all that stuff, So the point to make here is that it really takes at least 30 years for an idea to be defined in the research vocabulary, and journals and conferences started about it, before it becomes usable by industry. Now we had another winter. I remember when they stopped funding. We had a big neural network program here. This came out of the signal processing guys in electronics, but then the funding stopped. And but of course people kept on with it, and companies picked it up, and now we're in a world today where, when we talk about AI today, we're really talking about machine learning, deep learning, nested neural networks. And the difference here, with expert systems, the way they were built, you could find out why a decision was made. The big problem with deep learning is you don't know how the decision's been made. And explainable AI or explainable deep learning is a really big issue for us going forward, that we have to put a lot of money into. Anyway, so we now have machines that in certain circumstances can beat human beings, right? Chess, Go, can do things with the data faster than we can, spot problems in medical scans and so on faster than we can. So I do feel we're in a hype wave. I feel like there's a tsunami of AI. Everywhere I go, people want to talk about AI. That's not going to last forever, because it won't deliver in the way the media maybe or the governments think it might. It will deliver in certain, I'll come to that in a minute, but won't deliver everything that's being promised for it. So the question is, will we have another winter? When can I stop talking about AI around the world? And the big question still is, can we produce software that is a human being. And in fact, we already can fake it quite well. And there's a whole talk about the Turing Test, and I think Turing actually, he got the fact machines would be able to think, and we'd be able to do that, but I think he underestimated the intelligence of human beings, actually, because I think it's quite easy for a machine to fool a human being. And that's part of the problem we have going forward. But we are nowhere near general AI, but the question is, could we get there still? And if we could, what sort of world will that be? And we need to sort of get prepared for that now, before it's too late, I think. But so why AI now? Well, we've got the data, and we've got very fast machines, or some people have access to very fast machines to analyse it. Lots of opportunities, healthcare. I've got to speed up a bit. Obvious one, and that's what a lot of governments are pushing on, because they want us to all have a better quality of life for less money. Automated transport, big problem when car kills person. We kill people on the roads all the time, but when a car kills a person, it's a big issue, has to be. I don't think this is going to come as fast as people were projecting, because I think the issue of hybrid transport systems, where you have some driven by people, you've got pedestrians and you've got automated cars, just isn't going to work, but in certain circumstances it will work very well, and eventually it's where it will go. Personal tutoring systems, a pet passion of mine, not replace the teacher, bring in customised support for learners, and helping us deal with, manage the resources of our planet better, all sorts of things that AI can help us with. And this is where the other thing about AI, and I should put a slide in here to remind me to say it, is governments are worried about job losses. Right, so, and all in technical revolutions, industrial revolutions eventually bring more jobs. They might change, I mean, I think there's every chance that the AI revolution will lead to a 4-day working week, maybe some sort of basic income type structure for society. I think it will lead to social changes, just like the Industrial Revolution did. Right, we got a weekend because of the Industrial Revolution, eventually. But some people had to really suffer before that happened. So, you know, these things take a while, but I think that will bring societal changes. But what the government wants to do is make sure it was growing jobs as well as losing them, and worrying about losing them, and growing the economy. So this was the report, and the recommendations. So I got the phone call from number 10 to write this with Jerome, Jerome Pesenti is from industry. Key recommendations were about data sharing, which we thought and still think was really important, because small companies, researchers don't have access to the data they need, and data. So we wanted to set up data trust. We still want to do that. This is the summary of it, which is good. Big skills agenda. So that's the government, created 1,000 PhDs in AI, industry-funded AI MSc scholarships. That's for machine learning MScs. And then we need people. If we're going to have lots of students, we need people to teach and supervise. And at the moment, if you are an AI professor, industry comes along with a check, or even if you're not a professor, if you've got a PhD in AI, industry comes along with a check and says how much you want to come and work for us. And salaries are going up all the time, and it's very, very hard to keep programmers or researchers in this area, so we need to keep creating them at the moment. That will change, the cycle will change, but anyway. Alan Turing Institute has become the National Institute of AI as well as data science, and our programme to support the uptake of AI across public and private sector. Then we got £1 billion. Well, yes, I signed off this is the biggest cheque I ever signed off in the industrial strategy. It became a sector deal, and we've been spending £1 billion over the last year, 300 from government and the rest from matching from industry. And that's been exciting because all the skills agenda, I was named as the UK Skills Champion. We had our first meeting of the AI Council, which was a year late. That was this Matt Hancock, of course he's Health Secretary, now announced that in June last year, and we had the first council meeting this week on Monday. That's how my week started. But that seems like a light year ago. Anyway. I need to get on because I want to tell you about the future of the internet. So, I've talked about societal issues. privacy, security, trust. It's all about access to data and who controls it. The ethical and legal issues about that, algorithm accountability, AI audits, explainable AI, I could add to this slide, we need to sort out. The government's also set up the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, it was in the same budget as the sector deal, and that's arm's length to government and should be advising government on what to regulate and how they should do that. But regulation, just like financial regulation, should be done independent of government. Bias is really an important issue in this. There's my mentor, Karen Spark-Jones, who was an information retrieval, her algorithms are the basis of a lot of the stuff in the search engines. She used to say computing is too important to be left to men, and that's not to denigrate men, it's to say it's too important, everyone's got to be involved. And so I wrote a piece for The Conversation. When the Google guy said women don't do computer science, let's move on and get over it, he got the sack and I wrote this column. That's not connected at all, but the key thing is you need, and this is the connection with web science, because with AI, there's huge issues around bias. And we're all biased. The machines learn from our data, they're going to be biased one way or the other. How do we deal with this? So this is the piece that so how we do web science is how we should be thinking about socially responsible AI. It's got to be from an interdisciplinary point of view, and that's the thing I want to get across at the conference next year. It's about how you do interdisciplinary work, and I think we've pretty much nailed that at Southampton. We need the university to keep supporting it. It's really difficult in a university to do real interdisciplinary work. But if we don't do it for AI, then everything is lost. So we need to incorporate diversity and interdisciplinary work. Now, so let's finish by talking about the future of the internet in 5 minutes. 5 minutes of questions, then I'll go. So, this is Dave DeRoy's diagram. What's coming as part of the Internet of Things, we're moving into a world where we've got computers and we've got us and we've got all these little sensors that know about us and what we're doing, and then we're building smart cities. This is a three-way thing, no longer a two-way thing. And how we take that into account is really important. As I said, it's all about data, who manages it, who controls it, who thinks they own it, who controls it, who regulates that space, nationally or internationally. Really, really important. One of the major challenges of our times. And when it all goes wrong, there's the bit about Cambridge Analytica, the stories that have come out. Have you watched The Great Hack? Amazing film. How this just happened. Like the bank crash just happened. Nobody really knows. We know how much is deliberate and how much is just somebody doing something they didn't realise had a consequence. And without the whistleblowers, we might never have known. Cars killing people, bots that are trolls and hit the loving sex robots within 24 hours, just because people can do that, and poor old Microsoft get and the fake, right? Everything can be faked these days, and how do we know? When I got a call, one of the phone calls on my mobile phone, got off the plane this morning, answer phone, I hear you've had an accident. You know those calls, right? No, I haven't had an accident. But it did sound like a robot, And how do you know? When in the future, when you get a call like this, do they have to say, should the call say, you are now going to be talked to by a robot? Or do we just have to work it out for ourselves? There's so many issues around provenance and so on. Anyway, all these issues, as I said, I sometimes stop the talk here. I've said all those things. So these are my sort of sound bites at the moment for the press. It's got to be socially technical. Don't leave it to the machine learning programmers. If it isn't diverse, then it's unethical, and the future is fake. So think about that one. But we have an internet which has all these disruptive forces on it. Crime, security, different architectures being proposed. And I'm going to talk to you about the geopolitical issues for 5 minutes to make you think about where we're going in the future of internet governance. So I just took that off the web. Right, this is in 2015, so it's changed a bit, but not much. the darker the blue, the higher percentage of the population uses the internet in that country. So you can see where the light colours are. And in fact, I'll come back to that in a minute. But so you can see where the light colours are there. So what we then did, Kieran and I, was think about how data is governed in the different regions, 3 different regions of the internet. So we have the open and free. We sort of ostensibly live in an open and free, have an open and free internet. And if you don't go to China, you realise you don't, because you can't get onto half of it. But I can't now get onto some of my US sites because of GDPR. The US, everything's about market forces. The big companies in Silicon Valley, they lobby the government in Washington. I know it's a bit weird in Washington at the moment because of Trump, but it's that lobbying to get the laws that work for the companies, because they have to make the money for the shareholders. It's dominant. And they're a democracy with open press, freedom of speech, so they're not going to, that's their driver. Europe's gone very much down the data protection laws. Somebody said something in the press the other day that Europe regulates before it develops and innovates. And this is what's happened with GDPR. In my view, it's incredibly, fantastic idea, but it's overly specified. So it just makes it so hard to innovate. And the rest of the world won't adopt these rules, right? They will do enough. So I can't now get onto my favourite clothes where I got this jacket, the shop in America. I used to be able to order stuff and get it delivered to my friend's house. I can't now get onto the website because they're not GDPR compliant. Now that's just, there was a point where you couldn't read the Washington Post because it wasn't GDPR. I don't know if that's going to change now, but these are unintended consequences of this. Now, of course, another part of the world, China, has a completely different set of values. And the Chinese government, the Chinese I talk to dispute this. We think the Chinese government have access to everything. My Chinese friends in Xinhua tell me that's not actually the case, but I think if they want to, they can have access to anything. That's the point. They can put anyone in jail if they want to. They do not, they don't allow freedom of speech like we do. So they do things very differently. China has never been a democracy, and when I go to conferences in Silicon Valley and they say, oh, we'll change the Chinese. What, you're going to change centuries of a country not being a democracy? You're going to get them to be a democracy. And look, they've said they recreated an emperor for themselves, or he is so this is not an easy thing to do. But in China, you've got a very different governance regime, and then you've got the Russians who are trying to extract themselves from the internet retrospectively. China's extracted itself from the internet the whole time, in a sense. It's always put up this wall that it lets things through when under different circumstances. Most Chinese don't really care. They can't see the Western internet because they couldn't read it, and I can't read the Chinese internet. But in principle, there's a block, and but they've always had this attitude of, because they've always listened in on conversations. The government from the get-go listened in on the internet conversation, and I'm not saying that's good. I'm just saying that's how it is. It was, and they did it, as Nigel would say, mandrolically to start with lots of people reading things. Now they're beginning to do it using automated technology. And the Russians are trying to retrospectively pull Russia out of the internet. It's going to cost them a lot of money, and we'll see how successful they are and what that does to the Russian economy. But anyway, now this is the world we're living in. But the other important thing to point out, and this is virtually the last slide, is that we've just reached the 50-50 moment where 50% of the planet's on the internet, which is an amazing achievement, 30 years since the web. Quite an amazing achievement. And having talked about all the negative side of it, it is amazing what we can do with the internet that we couldn't do before. Absolutely amazing. And I have to be very careful when I'm talking to the press to make sure that you put the good side as well as the bad side. We do, the internet, the web has enabled us to do amazing things. But the 50% of the planet that's to come onto the web is mostly in rural China, rural India, and rural Africa. And we have to think about that as we think about how the internet is fragmenting, because if you look at the numbers today, if we were at 100% today, Then there's 1.4 billion in China, 1.3 in India, 1.2 in Africa. Well, I put Africa and China together because China basically already has the infrastructure, has put the internet infrastructure into Africa. And you know, North America, Europe, and South America. You know, Brazil actually is very much on sort of our side of things, and then there's smaller countries. We're nothing compared to the scale of these countries. India is a democracy, but it has this Aadhaar technology, and you cannot get onto an ISP in India without having an Aadhaar number. And the government would like to control access, like to know what's for banking. They say the Supreme Court in India has blocked that, but it depends which way the government goes on that. So you could have a very, very different majority. The majority of the internet could be managed by governments that do not have the same view of things as our governments do. And I think Kieran and I think we need to really think about this. We've written this paper. The 4 internet still has a lot of coverage, the geopolitics, digital governance, and that's going to be a book which is going to be out next year that Kieran's writing. Huh. I edit. And the story unfolds daily. We have the social credit score. We're going to have a web science conference, by the way, in China, and we're going to talk about this sort of stuff. They do talk about it. They are concerned, and it's not everywhere, but it's a. Don't think this won't come here. Right? We have financial credit scores. There is no reason why our governments won't start building. They already do, to a certain extent, do some analysis of what we do and how we behave. I'm not saying they do it in a malign way, but don't think this won't come our way, because cities will see it as ways of finding out what the population needs to be a smart city, sort of thing. Some African countries are asking India for the, this is Kenya mandating DNA-linked national ID without a data protection law, and this is the thing about, and Kenya has also asked India for the Aadhaar technology, and this is the bit about the Supreme Court is so far blocking the government's attempt to have access to the biometrics that are identified by the Aadhaar numbers. And that is the world that we are looking at. And somehow I like to think that web science is going to help us get back to this, but I don't know. Right, that's it. That's the end. I found the end. Thank you very much. Well, we've got 3 minutes. Anyone want to ask anything about that? Is it too fast? Is it?
My cousin, link. Why link? Do you think? Well, I was going to say deep learning. I was going to say just make a very broad connection. When you say we're wondering about what deep learning involves, are we wondering about that why?
Why is something linked?
Yeah.
I think there's a big link there. I think AI is inherent in how all this is growing, and that's the point I actually want to make. This is what we have our new program, AI for Future Society. At Stanford they call it human-centric AI, and I think we're going to be advertising for posts in that area. And it's really an extension of what we do in web science and thinking about the consequences of these very complicated internet-connected systems from a socio-technical point of view.
I feel it's my responsibility to
make me
rescue
go,
Wendy,
yeah.
to allow it to go. I'd just like thank you very much, Wendy, for such a whistle-stop tour.
I hope you found it
where
interesting.
the world is going and what AI has in the future. Thank you. So as well, those of you who are on the summer school are also going to this meeting that this seminar that Wendy is chairing, and that's in the next room. Mark, can you?
It's upstairs.
The next building on level 3 seminar room.
I better rush. What? Well, let me just turn around. Yep. When did you get told that?
No, 3rd of September. and then they told us same day. So there we go.
Fabulous. It's good to see you.
Nice to see you too.
That was wonderful. Pleasure. Hello. Hello. Fabulous news. Fabulous news. Hello.
Wendy, I interviewed you for a podcast for the university's public policy team.
Oh, did you?
Ages
Here.
ago in your
Yeah.
office.